Yeah, I think again, just thanks to everyone for joining. I have been an instructional designer myself now for 20 odd years. I have a ring light, but I'm probably old, maybe older than you anticipate. I've been doing this for a long time. And I've been really interested in the impact that AI in particular is going to have on the industry. And I think that's one of the reasons that we're doing this right now, is that it feels like for a long time there's not been much disruption in instructional design. And for good or for bad, whatever, I think probably the answer is both. AI now is at least bringing up interesting new conversations. And so I think just thank you everybody for joining, and also for being open to a conversation about the current state of instructional design, open to the idea that there might be things that we can do better, and also opportunities for us to do things differently. So yeah, just super happy that so many people responded. I think it was 414, was it, Kevin, in the
Mm,
end that we had
yeah.
from around the world. And so thank you for that, and thank you for joining us to dig into some of the results.
Thank you so much. And you come with such a wealth of experience. I'm so excited to run the survey with you and hear your expertise and your thoughts, Phil. Just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Kevin Alster. I'm a strategic advisor here at Synthesia. I'm seeing that we have some Synthesia users who are writing in. My job is really to help companies rethink how they communicate with video, and part of helping us rethink how we communicate with video is rethinking what we use video for and how we communicate and deliver instruction, and how we drive performance through better communication. Things like, how do we market better in learning and development? How do we design and develop better, more engaging and impactful content? And so really, it's a pleasure to be here today with you all. So with that, let's get into where we're headed. Phil, we've got quite the agenda, a lot to pack into the next 40 minutes or so. I think it's important for us to just set a little bit of context of why we ran the survey. I know that you've run a State of Instructional Design survey before, but I think this particular survey was a bit more, it was a serendipitous meeting that we want to share a little bit about. We'll go through the survey questions and debrief and explore the results. We want to leave plenty of time for Q&A as it comes up. And then finally, at the end, we want to announce the prize winners, because we have something special to give away. Phil, can you tell us what we sent out to folks who participated in the survey?
Yes. So I guess the reason, just to go to your first point, Kevin, about like why this and why now, it's a great question. I think I was looking for information about where we are as an industry and just struggling to find it. I did come across some really interesting data that we have from probably about 10 years ago now, about like how much work we do, what our workflows look like, how we measure success.
Mm,
Um, how like the specific challenges that we might face in doing our best work, and this kind of thing. And I was like, but where are we right now? And for me, the reason that things like now is a good time to ask this question, I think there's two things. So one is, of course, AI. It's everywhere. And as I just mentioned before, I think for instructional design, it has potentially very definitely disruptive implications. And so I thought, it would be very interesting just to put a shout out and to see, if and how people are using AI and how they feel about it, maybe more importantly. And then I think the other thing that I've seen change, particularly over the last couple of years or so, is loads of research out of organizations like the World Economic Forum. And I think this is actually fueled also by AI, but this almost new emphasis on the critical importance of instructional design in what seems to be urgent levels of reskilling and upskilling, be that
mm,
reskilling people to be able to use AI in their jobs, or more fundamentally, probably within the next 2-3 years, thinking about what our jobs look like, how are they different, and what's our new job in response to AI. So I think for those two reasons, now felt like a good time to just take a breather. Also give people some space to share how they're feeling about things openly and honestly, and to be able to share back some of this information. As I say, we got 414 respondents. Um, and I think hopefully you'll find the findings very interesting.
Very much so. And just to add on to that, I think one of the big questions that came up, because we had a chance meeting in Copenhagen, you happened to be in town, and we managed to grab a coffee and have a chat. I think there was the sense at the time, this was back in August, where at that time, you can't go on LinkedIn or you can't go into communities for instructional designers and help but feel like maybe you're behind, or that you should be using these tools in a different way, or that everybody's using these tools. But there really wasn't a place to, in a somewhat objective way, say what has been the impact of AI tools and large language models. And are they actually these large language models, and everybody sees a lot of hope for ChatGPT, but are they actually made for the instructional design process? And so that's really what we wanted to explore. And so we went through that a couple ways, and just to set up the conversation. For those of you who are not familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, this is kind of the cycle through which new technology goes through, and people's perceptions about its use and what they expect to use it for. And I promise this will come back to learning and development in just a second. But there are 5 major stages of the Gartner hype cycle that are worth talking through. There's the innovation trigger, which is maybe there's a particular pain or a piece of tech that's new has been developed. There's the peak of inflated expectations, which is suddenly people see this new tool or solution and think it can be used for everything. There's the trough of disillusionment, which is people realizing, hey, this probably can't be used as easily or what I thought it could be used for. There's a slope of enlightenment, which is maybe there are use cases that we can have this for, and the plateau of productivity, where it really finds its place, where our expectation matches what the tech can be used for. And I bring this up to say that there are 2 here that I want to call out. So you can see a bunch of other new tech that's on here, where one of the ones that you might be familiar with is prompt engineering. You can see that right now it's at the peak of inflated expectations. Maybe it's still climbing a little bit as of December 2024, where prompt engineering seems like it can really solve a lot of problems still. Whereas generative AI, we're starting to see it's entering the trough of disillusionment. Maybe it's not so great out here. But our expectations were too high for what generative AI could accomplish. And I'm curious, Phil, I know we were talking briefly about this hype cycle for emerging technology. I'm curious what your thoughts were when you were going through this chart.
Yeah, and it's such a great way of framing it. I think in some ways, hearing you just summarize through it, Kevin, it's like I feel like this every single day with AI. It's like this is just like a timeline for one day. It's like, oh, this is exciting. Let me see what I can do with this. And then suddenly I realize that actually what I'm getting out maybe isn't what I expected. So I think one thing for sure is that there is so much hype about AI. And one of the most important things I think that we can do as practitioners on the ground is to keep testing and trying and just seeing what is achievable and what is hype. But yeah, I mean, I think I would agree that generally speaking, so I've been working with a lot of corporate L&D teams in particular on the ground who have been experimenting with AI as an emerging technology. And I think this is true. I think it's varied. I think some people are just starting just now to experiment and are seeing some of the benefits of things like delegating tasks which we as instructional designers find distracting or low value. So there's a lot of people getting very excited about, particularly I find, about using generative AI for things like like scripting content or generating ideas. There's a lot of excitement, but at the same time, I think those who adopted a little bit earlier are now starting to feel some of those limitations of, yeah, but I don't know, there's an article which is interesting, which we can share after if anyone hasn't read it or wants to read it, called Navigating the Jagged Frontier, which says that there are some tasks that AI is great at and some that it just isn't great at. And so I think a lot of people are just starting to step into that zone where they realize there are things that AI can do, and then things where actually it's maybe even more effort to work with AI on them than there's this idea that it's an efficiency tool, but actually it requires so much effort, so much skill in things like instructional design knowledge, but also prompting, that it becomes really, really hard, and that's where we're hitting the trough. So I think for some people are still on the up, and I think that's because some organizations have just taken some time to get frameworks and processes and tools in place to be able to experiment. But certainly this excitement followed by an amount of maybe not disillusionment, but uh, yeah, just realism is definitely something
Mm.
I've seen on the ground.
I think also one of our participants, Lizanne, brings up a great point that individual adoption is one thing, but organizational adoption often lags behind. So I think that's interesting. I know we surveyed individual instructional designers, but looking at the L&D organization as a whole, at some of these larger companies is going to be maybe a slightly different story and maybe a bit further behind in this hype cycle.
100%. And just very briefly, there's another great article which we can share, but that shows that the majority of AI use in large organizations is unofficial, is under the radar, is not necessarily like centrally directed. So I think certainly, yes, that's a really great point that there is a difference between the two. But interestingly, we're seeing both. And usually, if we see both top down and bottom up kind of experimentation with technology, that's usually a good indication that we will get to a plateau of productivity.
Mm.
So I think interesting from that angle as well.
Wonderful. So let's get into it. I know that we looked at a lot of different we asked a lot of questions in the survey, but can you talk a bit about what were the questions we asked? Kind of what were we poking at in terms of what were we trying to learn from the results here?
Yeah, so as I say, like these are the research themes, if you like, that people have picked up on previously, but not really asked recently. And so partly we were influenced by um, existing research so that we could then do a comparison of like, actually, are things changing? Are things staying the same? Et cetera, et cetera. So these are the 5 main kind of bucket areas that we asked questions on. The first is roles, might be like, well, it's an instructional design survey. But what we were interested in here is specifically what flavors of human are designing learning experiences in 2024. What is the specific role? And I'm not going to go into the results right now, but this was motivated by some observations that I'd made on the ground about how the title of people who are designing training, I think, is changing. And I think we're seeing some patterns in who within organizations designs training. And I think that's very interesting. In terms of success metrics, this is basically just asking, well, how is our effectiveness as instructional designers evaluated? How do we know if we individually are doing well, but also how does our organization tell us whether or not we're doing a good job? And has that changed? So back in 2018, there was some really interesting research done. And basically we found out that we were measured primarily through completion rates and test scores. So I wanted to understand, is that still the same? Is that changing? Workload and workflow. This was just about how much work we typically do. I think we've always done an awful lot of work. We've always been crunched for time, but has that got any better or indeed any worse over the last 10 years? Was really interested to understand that. In terms of the challenges and the barriers to success, a couple of the interviews that I really love to run with instructional designers, I've done this with hundreds over the last year, is to ask them, like, what is the biggest barrier to you being faster? Because I often hear this process is very slow, but also what's the biggest barrier to you achieving like the best possible output and outcome? So barriers to speed and success, we asked about that too. And then finally, this tooling question. So I think there's, again, in interviews that I do and in other research that I read, I think there's a sense that the instructional design community has been really badly served by technology. There's this sense that we have to kind of lean into technologies that weren't necessarily built for us or for our process, and that our process is therefore slowed down, it's clunky, it's challenging. So what I wanted to ask was, what sorts of tools are you using and how do you feel about it? And of course, within that is maybe some insight. And yes, we did get it, but insights about whether or not people are adopting AI, how much, and what sorts of tools and how they're using them. So that generally was like the general overview of the sorts of questions that we asked and why we wanted to find that out.
I think what I'm particularly keen on hearing about is I know that instruction, when we talk about success metrics, I know that we would like to think that we are measured on performance, employee performance, those who are impacted by our training, they change their behavior or they are more productive for the company. But the reality, especially I think for much larger organizations, is what we call the content factory, where you're incentivized on how many requests did you deliver on, as if training were some sort of a widget, something that you could, if you input this much amount of time and effort, out comes this output. And I think from what we know as theorists is that that's actually not the case. That doesn't match the performance or the pace of which people actually develop. And I think a lot of that is reflected in the results here. So let's dive right more in. Agiro says success metrics is what I would like to hear and read more about. So let's get right to it. So what did we find? Let's go through, I know we started off with roles, Phil. So this idea, I love how you frame this here, the rise of the SME idea. So there was a percentage of respondents who identified as, I'm not sure where that number went, but a percentage of respondents identified as subject matter experts with ID responsibilities as part of their job role. And so I think that I'm curious to know from you, what drove this? What do you think is driving this role expansion? What do you think? What do you think is happening with the instructional design role? Let me see if I can dig up that number as well.
Yeah, pretty sure it's 26%, Kevin.
26%.
Yeah, thereabouts. That sounds very specific, but 26%, around about a third, let's say. And let's say the majority of respondents, so the call out was for instructional designers, and the majority of those who responded described themselves as staff instructional designers who are full-time or part-time, or freelance instructional designers who are full-time or part-time. But then there was this really interesting group, and I think this is new. Or maybe we've just surfaced it in a way, but what we know from our respondents is that around about 26%, so around about a third, identified as subject matter experts. So they describe their role as within an organization, they have a different role, but part of that role is to use their expertise to design training for example, the rest of the team or for different teams. And I think this is really interesting. I think I'm definitely seeing something similar on the ground where I think perhaps because of some of the pain that we feel when we try to turn instructional designers into subject matter experts. We all know, the pain of needing to source those experts. We then often get just like content bombed with 3 million, PowerPoint slides, and we need to get our head around all of that as well as the design task. It's a very slow and painful process. And so I think what we're seeing is over time, instead of trying to turn the instructional designer into a subject matter expert, we're asking, is it faster and easier, and do we get a better output if we actually turn it the other way around and try to turn a subject matter expert into an instructional designer? And that's not to say that those subject matter experts don't work with instructional designers, but it's a different dynamic, I suppose, where the initial design task goes to the subject matter expert, and then perhaps the instructional design team is more the point of expertise, the point of feedback, the point of refinement, where traditionally that's turned on its head. And I just think one more thing on this that I've noticed on the ground is I do a lot of, because I know how to have a good time, I spend a lot of time reading job adverts for instructional design just to get a sense of how the industry is changing. And I am noticing more and more that instructional design jobs often have a subject specific element to them. So for example, an accounting firm is hiring an instructional designer, but they want somebody who has been an accountant and who knows accounting. And there's this kind of subtext that we can teach you the instructional design bit, but you're going to have a domain specific role. And so I think this is just generally the direction that we seem to be moving in, that the majority of us are still instructional designers who work across different specialisms, but more and more of us are subject matter experts who are expected to become instructional designers, and how much support they get in doing that and how successful they are at doing that, I think, is the big question.
Yeah, I think what it calls in mind to me is that maybe it's getting instructional designers to specialize to also be experts in a particular industry, but also I think maybe the instructional design profession is overdue for a change because it's been such a generalist it's been such a generalist title for so long, meaning you're not only in charge of gathering, gathering the requirements for a particular training, but you're responsible for being to be a facilitator and a video designer in the same job title already feels like a huge part to do. And this idea of having to develop those resources as well as come up with, I think, like the human interaction part of it, or the human development part, seems like that's why the instructional design role is, it's been too broad for too long. And that's why there's what we'll see, and maybe I'm jumping a little bit ahead, is that if we look at how instructional designers are spending their time in developing content or resources or experiences, we'll see that so much of it is really being placed on the development part of things, where with these new tools, is that the best use of our time? Is that how we transform them? I'm very curious to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. Like I always picture the instructional designer role. Like if people ask me what my job is when I first meet them, and I tell them that usually instructional design doesn't mean much to them, learning design doesn't. But when you start to describe it, you realize that actually you've got like 8 jobs. Because like I'm, I'm a bit like a product manager. I define problems, I find solutions. I've got to understand learning theory. I've got to be great at customer relationship building. I've got to be great at project management. I've got to do some budgeting, and then I'm going to go and make a video, by the way, and procure some and yes. And so I think if we zoom out a little bit and look at different industries, so for example, UX design, it was in a similar position maybe 15 years ago, when it was ripe at that time for disruption, for streamlining, for professionalization, almost through, as part of which they became much more focused on very specific tasks and delegated other things. So I think you're absolutely right. I think we're seeing the emergence of potentially a new conceptualization of instructional designer, but we don't know what that looks like yet, I don't think, because is where does the most value from the instructional designer come? And
Yes.
I don't I don't think the answer is development because that's not necessarily why we're here. I think I actually did a boot camp this week where we were discussing how we're all instructional designers, but we're actually developers. If we write down everything we do, we're content creators, because that's the majority of what we do. We don't actually design. So what I'm hoping is that this change is marking, a new focus on instructional design as a specialism, which is exactly what happened in UX. So how to do it really well, and how to optimize it for different audiences, different outcomes and goals, and this kind of thing. So hopefully this is going to be liberating. But whatever the case, this trend of the merging together of the person who knows the stuff and the person who designs the training, I think is really interesting.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just in the chat is absolutely alive with folks who are kind of sharing their experience of the different roles that they serve in as instructional designers. And I think one of the ones that sticks out to me is Bridget wrote, I would also add psychologist and storyteller to the instructional designers' roles and responsibilities. And in my head, I'm thinking, my goodness, how can anybody possibly withstand being both a psychologist and a video editor? But that's just the reality of their role.
Yeah.
So moving on, Phil, let's go into the second point, because we have some charts that we want to show out on the next slide. Impact and speed as success metrics. Anything that you want to shout out about self-reported learning performance or speed?
Yeah, I think just to me, this was great news. So previously, there's been some research done on this. And as I mentioned earlier, usually these things are very quantitative. It's, did they complete the course? How many quiz questions did they get right? And I think that's probably primarily because it's hard to count things. And they're things which the technologies that we've built, like learning management systems, enable us to count very quickly. What's interesting, though, and I don't know if this is in any way related to changes in technology or just changes in priority, but this new, like the most common measure of success now is self-reported learner performance. So what does the learner on the ground say about how effective this was? We're seeing the reemergence, I think, of scrap learning methods. I don't know if people know that, but basically it's a very practical way of measuring whether something was good or whether it had an impact by asking the learner how much of this, what percentage of this training did you actually apply? The idea being that the parts that they don't apply could be scrapped, hence scrap learning.
Mm.
And so I really kind of like this idea that it feels like a better measure of learning to actually ask the learner on the ground, what does this mean for you? And there's a lot of, additional caveats to that. Like, it matters how you ask them, when are they also being observed? But there's a shift anyway from like stats in an LMS to actually trying to find changes in knowledge, skills, behaviors on the ground, which I think is really great. And then that we also have, of course, though, coming, very, very quickly up behind in second place, this ongoing fascination that we have about the speed. So it's like you said before, Kevin, it's almost like an industrial conceptualization of instructional design, which is how many projects did you do and how quickly could you do them? Like, the quicker we turn them around, the more successful we are. And there's a reality to that, particularly in the workplace, because, often we need training to, yesterday, because the product's changed and we need people to understand how right now. But there's also, I think, very limited, usefulness in measuring by speed if what we're really looking for is what's the return on investment, like, on the ground. So I think both good and expected news when it comes to what success looks like.
So something that you mentioned there that I think is something to dive into is that distinction between, I think, instruction and knowledge retention and recall and memorization versus on-the-job performance. And that on-the-job performance part is incredibly hard to measure. I know that, when we surveyed folks, we had everything from people who were saying their success metrics are based on how quickly they've pumped out resources, but some said Kirkpatrick's. And I know that's often the measure that folks who are measuring performance speak to. But I think my hot take is it's really difficult to find use cases where folks have said, I delivered X training and it meant this uptick in job performance. It's actually very hard to measure. And as I'm talking, I want to drop this in the chat. For those who are attending now, are you measuring success in your own work? If so, are you able to track the impact on the learner's job performance? And I think an important distinction to make here is some folks are working with frontline workers where there is a new behavior that you can identify and observe looking, if you were to observe them on the job longitudinally over a couple months. But when it comes to knowledge work, and especially if you're working in large organizations, I find that level 4 Kirkpatrick's absolutely elusive. So I'd love to hear from people in the chat if there's other ways that they're measuring success. And also, sorry, just to take a step aside real quick, Phil, I have folks who are writing in the chat that they'd love to see the results of the survey as well. We will be publishing those reports afterwards and sending out a follow-up email. So please do not worry, but just a little PSA there. And Phil, I think I cut you off. Is there something you wanted to add before we jump to the next ones?
Yeah, I mean, you should cut me off because I will talk forever. But I think there's another, you're right, that like I love, Christian, your conceptualization of the instructional design like a Swiss Army knife. One of the knives that we forgot is also like data analyst. And I always like to zoom out and compare what we do to like what product managers do. And in a product management team where basically you're designing and building a product, which is exactly what we do, they have a whole dedicated team looking at impact. They have specialized data analysis doing that work. And so, I think you're absolutely right that it's very complex and very hard to do. But I do also see some really interesting, I've been working with a few organizations, corporates, to think about how AI changes this bit. I think this is where it's potentially going to be more disruptive. And just to give you a very concrete example, there is an organization that's using AI to test the impact of coaching on sales performance. And what they're doing is they are basically there's two control groups. Some get coaching, some don't. And then they use AI to track their actual conversations with customers. And what that enables them to do at a scale and to a level of detail that's just been impossible before is to analyze, for example, if the coach coached them in being more whatever, like challenging when people didn't want to buy something, did they use those techniques? Did they use that language? And then tracking the data between that and actual sales. And these kind of things are very, very emerging, very new, but it just gives us, I think, a little window into how AI, if we're comfortable with those levels of monitoring and data, and there's all sorts of other big questions there, but there's some interesting potential, I think, for particularly language-based performance. Like you say, knowledge work is really hard to assess, but it's one, I think, of the most powerful use cases for AI is to be able enable us to do things that we just couldn't do without it. And this is one example.
Exactly, exactly. Maybe if we spent less time on development, we could spend more time on analyzing and evaluating those results. But with that, let's go on into workloads. I think that the call out here, the tagline, if I had to give this part one, is that we're a time crunch bunch. I think this really captures what we're seeing as probably, I think, maybe the most concerning part of the survey results, which is the workload pressure and the project juggling that lots of instructional designers are handling on average 3 projects at a time, and some are handling more than 50 projects a year. My goodness, I'm wondering what those projects are. But my question for you, Phil, is like, from your perspective, with this high project load, what are the consequences of this workload to instructional quality? Is it should we be focusing on developing smaller experiences? Should we be focusing particularly on different types of skills? I guess, what is the call out here?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I think there's not a huge amount of change here, which is interesting. So what we're not, I mean, over time. So what we've not seen is like, AI is suddenly making us all 40% more efficient, which is in some research papers, they're the sorts of statistics that we're seeing. So I think it's probably a lagging impact. We'll probably see it when we run another survey in a year or so. But right now, we've always been stretched and we're still stretched, is the headline. I think this also helps to maybe contextualize some of the diversification of the ID pool within an organization. So like this is a lot of work, but it's also nowhere near the total amount of work that we would do if we were able to do more. And I actually had a really interesting conversation just this week with the leadership team of a very big global organization with a huge L&D team. But they said the first step every quarter is to look through all of the requests for training and to eliminate about 80% of it because they just don't have the capacity. So there's this question in my mind around whether we can do a better job of, like you say, maybe we need to do better needs analysis. Maybe we need to actually rethink our process and be able to identify what are the changes that we need to see, and therefore what are the trainings. And maybe actually there's a far smaller number than usually we come up with, when generally the culture of requesting training in organizations is a bit like, yeah, who wants what? And then we kind of finger in the wind, try to prioritize based on, I don't know, it varies. Sometimes it just comes down to who's most influential in the room. Sometimes it's mapped to KPIs, whatever. But yeah, I think this is really interesting, and it shows that there is, we are both working at capacity and still delivering only about, I mean, I don't know, maybe this is just based on that one stat this week, but at most, let's say 50% of what our organization would like us to deliver if only there was the resource. So I think there's some interesting opportunity to free people up to be able to work faster, but also to, without compromising the quality. I think that's where the big question lies here.
Yeah, we had somebody, Clara, write into the chat on a call I attended this week. There was one of the presenters mentioning some trainings within our company having been redone 7 times. Did not give the reasons why, but I'm sure it has to do with all the changes and introductions to new products and apps. So not only are we creating that new content, but we're also recreating existing content, but then There's always a cost. I can't remember if we included in these results as well, but I think we saw maybe it's in the numbers here. It's coming up in just a second, but 60% of ID projects were net new content, and 40% were revamp. Well, 40% of their time was dedicated to revamping and updating old content. So again, both come with their own work constraints. And to Clara's point, we're often not given a reason why. It just comes down as a request, and you only get to do needs analysis around so much context to figure out why it's the problem in the first place. Cool. So we have a few more things to discuss here before we get on to the winners, and just being mindful of time. Phil, we should probably buzz through these to the end so that we have enough time to announce our wonderful winners. And we have a few questions that have come in the chat, but just some things to call out here. The biggest barriers to quality in instructional design. So why are instructional designers not spending more? What's getting in the way of them creating the really robust, pedagogically sound learning experiences that they want to create? The two commonly most cited barriers here that folks were talking about for speed are slow production processes and collaborating with SMEs. And really a quick word on that. I think coming from a tools perspective, coming from the Synthesia side of things, this is one of this area of making production processes faster and collaborating with SMEs is one of the reasons we're not just focusing on making video easier for everyone, but we're also rethinking through the platform different ways of working. And one thing I want to call out is this idea of collaboration when creating videos. We often find that what is the current process of an instructional designer collaborating with an SME to produce video content? It's that the instructional designer comes up with a script or an edit of a video. They send it out to the SME or to other stakeholders. They then get that feedback back, or notes that are in all different types of formats. They have to bring it all together, figure out what changes to make. All of these small operational processes take time, and there are new tools that are being developed, one of which is Synthesia, which allows everyone to collaborate together at the same time. So we're not asking for different outputs, but we're asking for everyone to change their processes in the way that folks collaborate together, because these are such big barriers as we're seeing to instructional design. Anything you want to jump in there with, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think, you can see this in the second point as well. One of the most wicked problems for an instructional designer is how much time we have to spend on development. As I said before, if we were to title ourselves according to how we spend most of our time, most of us would be developers. I think some people probably are called developers, but that's not usually why we came into the industry. Usually we came in to understand how humans learn and to design stuff. And then, just on the collaborating with SMEs, I think it goes back to the point that we made earlier, that we don't really have, again, if we go back to UX as a parallel, they have Figma now. They have a tool built for UX designers, with UX designers to help UX design. We do not have anything like that. On average, I think we use 15 different tools that were kind of built either for general purpose or for something else, and we have to hack them together. And so there's something about collaborating with SMEs which is slow, yes, because SMEs are hard to come by and they're busy doing something else often, but also because we just don't have the tooling to make it easy. And so the sorts of thing that you're talking about there, Kevin, and I'm exploring similar collaboration tools, but within the end-to-end process, I think could make a big difference there. So there's opportunity to overcome some of that for sure.
And just building off of that, we're talking about the tools that are changing how we design and develop and deliver and maybe in some case evaluate content. The big one that I was very curious to that I want to go on to now is this idea of AI tools tried by instructional designers. So we asked you what AI tools that you're using, and I think without it wasn't a surprise to me at all that ChatGPT was the one that was ranked the highest. I think we've all, it was exciting to find out that 84% of respondents have tried it, and 57% identify it as their most used tool, which makes me go back to this chart right here. Very curious what they were using it for, and a lot of the open response was around reformatting learning objectives. It was about coming up with the best needs analysis questions. it was about coming up with a proper assessment or knowledge check questions. So again, touching all parts of the instructional design process, of the ADDIE instructional design process. I think the thing to call out here, though, that's interesting for me is ChatGPT is still an open tool. And if we think about that, the Gartner hype cycle, there were a lot of expectations for what ChatGPT would do to change the instructional design and development process. But we're starting to see that maybe those outputs aren't so great. And I want to call something out call out your most recent post on large language models and their impact, Bill.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, yeah, exactly that. So I think this is where I am in the hype cycle a little bit as well, partly because I have this boot camp and I work through the instructional design process with 25, 30 instructional designers every month. And what we see is ChatGPT is initially very exciting, but then once we do some digging into actually how effective are these tools at supporting instructional design, the answer is not very. And that's fine. They're not built they're built to be general tools. They're built to go broad and not deep. But what that means is that at the moment, at least, there is, I think, a little bit of a worrying trend where we're seeing research which shows us that more and more people are using ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot or Gemini, these general AI tools. More and more people are using them day to day in their instructional design work. But we're also seeing at the same time, and this is what I just put out this morning, just a short research post on it, just to flag attention. But we're also seeing that those tools are not very good at instructional design, that they're actually, because of the way that AI works, if we ask for specific sorts of input from AI, it surfaces things which are most common, not things which are optimal. And so a great example is, it will very gladly tell you how to design in line with learning styles when learning styles have been debunked for many years, for example, because it's something that people talk about a lot. Whatever, it's like asking Google. And so, yeah, I think what's interesting, just as a final comment maybe from me, is the emergence in other industries of highly specialized tools. So in coding, we see this. In medicine, we see this. The coding example, if you want to have a look, there's one called Cursor AI or GitHub Copilot. In medicine, there's Hippocratic AI. And these tools have been built really in response to this challenge. They've said, look, general AI tools are not built for our specialism, so for coding, for medicine, whatever. Let's fine tune them so that they can actually, we can feel the real benefit of these tools in our context. And so that's what we've seen elsewhere, and that's what I predict. And this is what I'm researching at the moment. If we built a specialized Copilot for instructional design, what would that look like? How would it differ from these general tools, and how would it serve instructional designers? And maybe a positive thing for me to close on actually is that in those cases I just gave, so in coding and in medicine, what we haven't seen is coders and medics losing their jobs. We've seen instead those people being able to professionalize even further. We've seen them be able to make smarter decisions faster and to deliver more value. And I think that's my vision for instructional design, is that we go deep, that we use this as an opportunity to professionalize and focus and get rid of some of the the army knives and forks and whatever else is on there, and to really focus on what great looks like, maybe helped by AI. So yeah, I think it's very, very interesting. I think we're seeing loads more use, but also we should see a lot of caution around its use, because AI still needs you, and AI is not as good as you at instructional design for sure.
And just to echo that, Roberto Yellow, who's a very good friend of Synthesia, wrote, "They can only be good at instructional design if we are good at instructional design," meaning exactly the AI. And so you have to know what best looks like. You have to know what the outcome you're looking for. So yes, in response to some of what the people in the chat, Matt, are saying, that what if you add additional prompting? Well, you can add additional prompting, but that doesn't necessarily mean you'll get to the best output. Phil, I'm just going to skip ahead here because I know we have a little bit more time to take questions, but I want to make sure that we get to announcing who the winners are of the randomly selected participants who contributed. We selected 4 winners. I believe 2 of those were for a month of unlimited Synthesia videos, and the other was for seats to your AI and L&D bootcamp. So any last words before we have the avatars announce who our winners are for this time?
No, just thank you everyone for this, and also brace for the most bizarre, mind-blowing avatar. Every time I see Synthesia, it just blows my mind a bit. So yeah, brace.
Me too. Me too. So here we go.
Hey there, Phil and Kevin. Thank you for giving me the honor of introducing the winners for today. But first, I wanted to take a second to thank all of you for your submissions for the State of Instructional Design survey. Just know that we're doing our best at Synthesia to make your lives easier when it comes to how you use video. But now for the moment we've been waiting for. We'll start with the winners of the Synthesia accounts. Drum roll, please. The winners of a month of unlimited Synthesia videos is Omar Rahman and Jennifer Egelmez.
All right.
I really hope I'm saying those names correctly. And for the winners of Dr. Phil's AI and L&D Bootcamp, I'll turn it over to another friend.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And what an honor it is to announce the winners of the AI and L&D Bootcamp. Please put your hands together for Leanne Furby and Marco D'Alessio. Congrats, you two, and good luck in the boot camp. Make sure you train hard, and I wish you the best. Back to you, Kevin and Phil.
Oh my goodness. Sorry, that's one of the new avatars in there with a cozy pink sweater. Phil,
So-
and any words for these two who are going to be joining you in the next boot camp?
Yeah, can't wait to meet you. And I think, yeah, it's really interesting running the boot camp. What it shows is that there are both risks and opportunities, but maybe reassuringly, the biggest takeaway I think that they'll get from the boot camp is that AI can increase both our speed and our effectiveness, but AI absolutely needs you in the mix. In order to get magic out of AI, you need to tell it not just what to do, but how to do it. And so for me, one of the greatest benefits of AI is that it forces us to be very reflective and intentional about how we make design decisions. And in that way, it helps us to come back to what is usually the joy and the motivation behind us being instructional designers in the first place. So yes, thank you for applying, and I can't wait to work with you.
Yeah, and Phil, there's some questions about the AI Learning Design Bootcamp.
Sure.
And so maybe that's a quick link you could drop into the chat just for those who are interested. Before we go into the Q&A as well and kind of take us here to a close, some of you were asking also about maybe you were here to learn more about Synthesia or some of the other webinars that we're running. So you can register for any of those webinars. I wanted to put the link there, as well as there are some folks who are asking about Synthesia. And if you want to book a demo, of course, feel free to add those links. So thank you, Phil, for dropping in the link there to your bootcamp. I've seen such resounding reviews from folks who've taken it. So I think it's also, I think there's also a lot of evergreen content in there, meaning, from just word of mouth, I've heard that it's not just about the prompts, but it's more so about the thinking that goes into using the tool well, which I think is something that I've seen maybe separates this from a lot of the AI and L&D boot camps that I've seen that are out there. So such good stuff. Cool. We have a few questions that have come in, Phil. If I think we have about 5 more minutes before we roll out. Just wanted to take a second. We have a really good question in here from Robert, who writes, if AI allows for better feedback or measurement and increases our capacity for self-serve, how do you see the role of instructional designers change? I'm going to drop that into the chat so that we can all ruminate on that for a second. So if AI allows for better feedback and measurement and increases our capacity for self-serve, how do you see the role of the instructional designer changing? I can jump in for my quick 2 bits, and then I'll pass it over to you, Phil. So Robert, I'm always pondering this question because I think with AI, it really gives us a chance to reflect and say, what is the human part, the human to human part of the job that we have? And I think there are two parts of the instructional design role that, if we go back to this slide, we can see we spend so much of our time designing and maybe some of it evaluating, but if there's opportunities for better feedback and measurement and increased capacity to self-serve, so having humans find the resources that they need, I think it's up to us to be able to do better analysis. So on the front end and doing discovery and using that extra time to interview other humans and figure out what is their reality like, what are the problems that they're actually trying to solve, what are the jobs that they're actually doing. So I think that's the first place to spend. And then the other place I think is, it just slipped my mind. I was so confident about this, Phil. But yes, right for now, I've got Friday brain. It just immediately just puffed out of my head, but I'll stick with my doing better discovery and investigative analysis is mine.
Which I think is, absolutely spot on. And feel free, obviously, to jump in if that comes back. But I think
Sure.
for me, if I just look at, I agree with that. I think it's about shifting emphasis from building stuff to defining problems, defining the best solutions, and then asking, did it actually work? And then just creating this loop. And that's not a new vision. That's a vision that we've all had for many, many decades. But I do wonder, and I don't know the answer yet, but the question that I have is AI the moment that enables us to do that? I think the other thing, if I just go a bit wild and like big vision, I love this reference to self-serve. I do imagine a scenario, you can imagine a scenario where at the moment we're seeing the ID role merging a little bit with the subject matter expert role. The thing that I've been asking myself more recently is what would happen? One thing that AI could now enable us to do is to turn learners into learning designers. So this concept of self-serve becomes much more dynamic. And if that's the case, do we still need instructional designers? So imagine a scenario where, and this is something that I'm working on at the moment as part of an epiphany related research project, but imagine a scenario where as a learner, we can enter who we are, or it already knows who we are, what we need to do, where we're going. And it's a bit more like, sometimes people ask me like abstract questions, like what does AI look like? And I'm like, it looks like the little paperclip. Clippy. Because
Clippy, yes.
Because imagine if actually it's, we're not too far away from a situation where AI can notice that I am, for example, I don't know, writing a project plan and jump up and know, what great looks like and be able to give me feedback in the flow of work and blah, blah, blah. And what I've done there is I've effectively designed my own experience because my AI knows what I need and it's helping me to complete that experience. But even in that model, that's not necessarily the disempowerment of instructional designers. It just changes their role. Because that AI needs to be trained in what great looks like. It needs to understand who the learners are, and it needs humans in the loop to be analyzing the quality of the outputs, to be analyzing the data and this kind of thing. So I think if we were to prepare for the most likely future as instructional designers, we don't know exactly where we're going yet, but one thing I encourage people to do is to play with AI, but more specifically and concretely to become more confident with data. Because I think whatever happens, there's going to be more data. And at the moment, we're not necessarily trained to do that. And maybe that's one of the things we can now do. If we can hand over some of the development work, we can then focus more on, analysis and evaluation, but also some of those concrete skills about like, well, how on earth do you go about comparing data, running tests of data, like all of those things that really we have no training in whatsoever.
Yeah. Phil, as you were talking, my original idea suddenly sprung into mind, but I definitely agree with you as far as what you said about, with these tools as they get better at helping us to design the learning. It's maybe thinking about if everybody has access to these tools, what are the resources and experiences that get built as a result of them, and they'll be more pedagogically sound because that will be baked in within a specialty tool. The other one that I wanted to add on is other than investigative discovery and needs analysis is this idea of what are the human parts of how we learn, and that's this idea of building and bridging communities of practice. I think that's somewhere where AI is, what it allows you to do is it gives you access to information. It can repackage that information and make it so that it's in a format that you can then apply to your work. And I think we see this a lot with even pre-AI, or not pre-AI, but with YouTube and information that's already out there, people are already self-serving. They're teaching themselves how to use Excel and build pivot tables, not because of something that's internal on an LMS made by an instructional designer, but made by an entrepreneurial person who put it out on a free platform. So if we live in this world where we have more access to information, then I think it's our expectation that the average employee will be able to find their own find information for the problems that they're trying to solve, but they won't have access to expertise or a community of practice where people are sharing their own human-led processes for how they get certain jobs done or how they tackle a specific problem. And I think those communities and connecting people with other people falls under this evolution of this role, I think, from instructional designer to this idea of people and experiences and thinking about the social learning aspects of personal development. But again, it goes back to what is the human part of what you can do as an instructional designer and how are you providing that expertise to people who are asking for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, fundamentally, how do humans learn and what do those learners want? And I think at the moment we're building lots of stuff without a full understanding of actually how does the human respond? And are there elements of the learning process that just need to be human, be that the design part, the delivery part? I don't know. But yeah, I think it will be very interesting as the research continues to start to understand where the true opportunity of AI lies. And there will be things that it does better than others, and there'll be things that support learning better than others. And I think just the opportunity to be able to surface that is maybe the most exciting thing about AI.
There's so much to look forward to, Phil, including the resources and the report that we will send out following today's webinar. But thank you all to the folks of you, those of you who spent your lunch with us, who spent your breakfast with us, or wherever you are in the world. And also just Phil, thank you so much for your time. We've got so much to discuss.
Yeah, thank you. And again, yeah, thanks to you, Kevin, and thanks to everyone. This has been a great chat. And please do feel free to, once you get the report, send questions my way through LinkedIn, whatever. I'm very open to conversation, but thank you. This has been great.